Have you ever been called a disgrace to the family? Have you ever felt that heavy gaze of someone measuring you without saying anything, as if the simple fact of your existence was a nuisance? That's right. It was exactly like that with me. In front of everyone, uncles, brothers, cousins, nephews, my father pointed his finger, his voice firm, cold, and said, "You are the shame of the family. And you know what's worse?" I didn't answer, not out of cowardice, but because at that moment I understood something that no one had ever explained to me. Whoever needs to shout to assert power is actually trying to hide a fear. And his was old. But I didn't yet know what was behind that sentence. That day I just felt the floor open up, shame rise up my face, and a piercing silence take over the room. Everyone looked at me, some with pity, some with pleasure. And I realized there's nothing people love more than seeing a man being humiliated in public, especially when that man refuses to follow the script expected of him. On the outside, I kept quiet. Inside, something broke, and along with it something else was born. A calm, precise, almost cold anger. The kind of anger that doesn't explode, it observes. And it was by observing that little by little I began to see what no one had the courage to say. Have you ever noticed that every family has a secret? That subject that is never discussed, the name that is never mentioned, the story that everyone pretends to have forgotten? Well, mine had it too. And I discovered the worst way of all, being the scapegoat. Life has these ironies. We spend years believing that we are the problem, when in reality it is just the mirror in which others do not want to look. And when someone like me decides to look back, what comes to light isn't ugly. It's rotten. But no one wants to see rot in their own house. That Sunday, the smell of roast meat and idle chatter could not hide the discomfort. My father, as always, in the center of the table. A man with a harsh word, a measured smile, and a past that everyone treated with respect, except me because I saw beyond the theater. I grew up watching him talk about honor, family, morals, while locking his bedroom door and becoming a different man. And if there's one thing I learned early on, it's that the more someone talks about morals, the more they have to hide. After lunch, he gave his speech. He talked about how children should be role models, about how a self-respecting man doesn't cause disappointment to his family. And then came the sentence. "Look at him," he said, pointing at me. "This is what happens when someone strays from the path." No one breathed. I didn't cry. I just stood there with the glass of water shaking in my hand, and a question echoing in my head. If I am shame, what exactly is he? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. And what I would discover would change everything, not only how I saw my father, but also how I saw myself, because the real secret of this story wasn't in what he accused me of being, but what he made a point of hiding for decades. In the days that followed, something in me changed. I started noticing the little things. Exchanged glances, silences, pauses between sentences. I noticed my mother would look away every time a certain woman's name was mentioned. A woman I didn't know, but who always seemed to be in the shadow of some memory that no one wanted to rekindle. And that's when everything started to fall into place. My father was the kind of man who prided himself on having built everything from scratch. He spoke of it as if it were a medal, as if the world owed him something for it. But when the truth came, and it always does, I understood that no one builds anything clean when the foundation is made of lies. I remember the first time I tried to talk to him about it. It was late afternoon. He was sitting on the porch smoking that same cheap cigarette he used to think. I asked, "Why did you say that in front of everyone?" He looked at me without blinking and replied, "Because it's true." That sentence went through me like a blade, but his gaze trembled. And when the gaze trembles, the truth is there, it just needs to be pushed. I didn't push that day, but I started digging, because every man who carries shame needs to know where it comes from. And mine wasn't about who I was. It was about what I was made to believe I should be. The difference is huge. It was then that I found the first clue, an old letter forgotten at the bottom of a drawer among old bills and yellowed photographs. The handwriting was his, but the way he wrote, no. Softer, almost poetic, as if he were another man there. And at the end of the letter, a signature, a woman's name. a name I had never heard, and next to it, a date, 3 months before my birth. The world stopped. It wasn't just any letter. It was a confession. And for the first time I understood that the man who called me a disgrace had a past that he himself could not bear to face. From that day on, something inside me started to burn. But it wasn't anger, it was curiosity. And curiosity, when mixed with pain, becomes courage. I wanted to understand who that woman was. Why did he hide that? And what, after all, did she have to do with me? That's when I realized that my story of being the shame was just the surface. Beneath it, there was another, older, dirtier, more human. And I was going to find out. Even if I had to dismantle everything they called family to do so, if you've ever been the different one, the one who doesn't fit in, the one who carries the weight of other people's gaze, you'll understand what I felt at that moment. The feeling of being about to open a door that no one wants to open, but that you know you need to. And that's exactly what I did. Shelter. And from then on, nothing was the same. Because what was on the other side of that door, it was the secret they had hidden for decades, and which, once revealed, would silence each of them. Before I continue this story and show you what was really hidden behind that letter, I want to ask you something simple but important. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched a part of you. And perhaps it reminded you of something from your own life, a time when you too were silenced, singled out, or judged without understanding why. So I want you to comment below, write a word, a phrase, anything that represents what you're feeling right now. It could be, I understand, I've experienced this, or even, it's not fair. These comments aren't just numbers. They help us create a conversation that many people need to have, but few have the courage to start. When you comment, YouTube understands that this content is important, that it needs to reach more people who also carry stories swallowed by shame or fear. And that's how we transform pain into dialogue. Please enjoy and leave a like, because it shows that it's worth continuing to bring you stories like this. Real, intense, and human. Stories that don't have perfect heroes, but rather real people, with flaws, regrets, and the courage to look at their past without running away. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. That way you won't miss the next episode, because what follows will reveal the exact point where everything changed, the moment when silence became a voice, and the shame they inflicted on me became the beginning of my truth. Now yes, let's continue. That night, after hearing that family shame, I left the room without looking back. The air felt heavy, as if every word still stuck to my skin. The sound of voices, fake laughter, silverware hitting plates, everything felt distant. I just wanted silence. I walked down the street aimlessly, trying to understand what had just happened. And the strangest thing is that, even as an adult, even with so many falls under my belt, it still hurts to be treated like the mistake no one wants to own up to. The story began long before that dinner, long before anyone raised their voice and called me a disgrace. It began in a large, old house where the walls seemed to hold more secrets than memories. My father was always the center of everything, respected, strict, possessing the last word. I grew up learning that feeling was weakness and obedience was virtue. He spoke little, but when he did, no one questioned him. And my mother, she was the opposite. Silent, always with her eyes lowered, as if carrying the weight of something she could never say. I grew up trying to be the perfect son. Good grades, good posture, good manners. But all it took was one off-script gesture for him to look at me with silent contempt. And it was like that for years, until the day he discovered something that changed everything. I was 17 when he caught me texting a boy from school. There was nothing explicit, just words, laughter, curiosity. But to him it was a sin, a dishonor, a shame. He didn't scream. It was worse. He spoke softly, coldly, as if delivering a verdict. You're not my son anymore. And he left. My mother tried to defend me, but one look from him was enough to make her back down. It was the first time I realized that fear could rule more than love in a home. From then on, I became a ghost within my own family. Dinners were silent, the stares hard. My brothers treated me as if I had a disease, and I, who only wanted to live my truth, began to hide from myself. I left early and no one tried to stop me. It was as if everyone was relieved to be free of the mirror that showed them what they pretended not to see. The years passed. I worked, studied, built my life. I did what many do. I learned to hide it. I wore a smile as a shield. And from the outside, I looked fine. But inside, I still carried that phrase like a scar that time never erased. Shame on the family. Until one day, fate forced me to return. It was at my mother's funeral. I hadn't seen those people in over 10 years. When I arrived, the looks were the same judgment, the same silence. My father was there, old, weaker, but with the same look he always had, the one that passes through without needing to say anything. I wanted to say so much, but I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at a man who never forgave me for existing the way I am. After the ceremony, an aunt approached. "Your father is sick," she said. "Maybe it's time you two talked." I gave a half smile. "Talk? After everything?" She sighed. "He has secrets you can't imagine." At that moment, part of me wanted to ignore it. The other wanted to understand. Because no matter how much I feigned indifference, there was still something inside me that yearned for answers. I needed to know what she meant by secrets you can't imagine. In the following days, I returned to the house where I grew up. It was the same and different at the same time. Photos on the walls seemed to eye me suspiciously. Everything there smelled of the past and guilt. When I entered my father's office, my heart beat differently. It was the one room I could never enter. Now the door was ajar. I entered slowly. The table was covered in old papers, folders, and yellowed letters. There was a portrait of him as a younger man, smiling, next to a man I didn't know. On the back of the photo was a handwritten phrase, "Forever R." The handwriting was my father's. In that moment, everything began to make sense. The way he reacted to my truth, the contempt, the hatred, the silence. Perhaps what he hated most about me was a reflection of what he himself had tried to erase his entire life. As I tried to process that, I heard a noise. It was him. He was in the doorway, looking at me. Time hadn't dulled the firmness of that gaze. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice still sounded like an order. I took a deep breath. They also said I shouldn't be who I am. But here I am. He was silent for a few seconds. "What did you see?" I showed him the photo. He paled. "Where did you find this?" "On your desk, next to your open Bible." He sat down. He looked tired, defeated. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Because shame doesn't go away when we get older. It just changes form." I didn't expect him to confess. I didn't expect him to let his guard down. But in that moment, something inside him broke. "His name was Roberto," he said, looking at the photo. "He was the only man I ever loved. But back then, loving was a crime. So I learned to hate." The silence that followed was heavy but different. It was no longer the silence of guilt. It was the silence of truth. And as he spoke, I realized the shame he'd heaped upon me wasn't mine. It was his. He just didn't know what to do with his own past, so he decided to turn me into a mirror he could break without guilt. I stood there listening, trying to figure out if this was a plea for forgiveness or a belated confession. But deep down, I knew it was both. He took a deep breath and said, "Do you want to understand? Then stay. I'll tell you everything." And it was at this point that the story really began to change, because the secret he'd kept for decades wasn't just about forbidden love, it was about what he'd done to hide that love. And what he said next completely changed the way I saw my own story. If you've made it this far, write the word shame in the comments. I want to know who understands the weight this word carries and how much it destroys when we let others define who we are. He sat there in the antique armchair, his eyes lost in space, as if he'd just opened a door he'd sworn to keep locked forever. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall was the only sound. I still held the photo in my hand, and that frozen smile of two men side by side seemed to scream louder than any words. "His name was Roberto," he repeated, his voice breaking. "We met when I was still working in the countryside before I married your mother." I sat across from him, unsure of what to say. The truth is, part of me wanted to scream, to demand, to ask why he'd put me through all this. if he himself carried the same blood, the same desire, the same fear. But another part just wanted to listen. "What was he like?" I asked. My father looked at the ground, a faint smile of remembrance. "He was simple. He worked with me at the factory. He had a calm demeanor, spoke little, but when he did, the world stopped to listen. He said that, at first, it was just friendship. They went to work together, shared lunch, and walked home. But one day it rained," he said, his voice almost fading. "We took shelter in a shed, and I think that's where it all began. It was quick, silent, but I still remember the smell of wet earth and the sound of rain hitting the roof." He paused for a second. "We kissed." Those 3 words hung in the air, heavy and sweet at the same time. I never imagined hearing something like that from his mouth. The same man who made me believe that loving another man was wrong was now telling me, with tears in his eyes, what he himself had lived through in secret. "And then?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath. "Then, fear came. A neighbor saw it. And back then, son, getting caught like that was the end. I could lose my job, my house, everything, so I did what most people did. I denied it. I said it was a lie, that he had forced me, and he left town. I never saw him again." His words cut me to the core. "And you moved on?" I asked. "I moved on the way it was. I married your mother. I had you. I did what was expected of me. But inside me, nothing stayed the same." He looked up and said, "When I saw you as a boy with that curious look in your eyes, I knew you had something of me, and that made me despair." It was the first time I saw the man who had always been synonymous with strength break down in front of me. He wept silently, without drama, without disguise, and I understood. It wasn't just shame. It was regret. It was guilt. It was buried love. But what he said next changed everything. "He came back to me once," he continued. "Years later, when you were little. He said he was sick, that he wanted to see me, and I went." That confession made my heart race. "Did you see him?" I asked. "Yes, just one night. He lived in an old boarding house downtown. I went there thinking I was going to say goodbye, but what happened there?" He trailed off. "That's what haunts me to this day." I stared at him, unblinking. "What happened?" He hesitated, took a deep breath, and said, "We made love for the last time." The words came out slowly, as if each one carried the weight of decades. And the next morning, when I woke up, he wasn't breathing anymore. I stood still. "He died?" My father nodded. "Of a heart attack," they said. I called for help, but it was too late. I stayed there, hugging him until his body cooled down. And then I went home pretending nothing had happened. But since that day, nothing has had color. A deep silence fell over the room. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes more than any confession. I realized that all the anger he unleashed on me was born in that room, that night. He'd spent his life trying to erase what he felt, and he'd used my life to do it. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "Because no one wants to know the truth when it doesn't fit into the picture of the perfect family. I kept it to myself, because it was the only way I could remain the man everyone thought I was." That's when I remembered everything he'd said at dinner, the words that had cut through me like a blade. "You called me a disgrace, Father." He lowered his head. "I know, and I was calling myself that." For a moment I felt something strange. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hate either. It was as if, for the first time, I saw the man behind my father. A man who loved the wrong thing at the wrong time and paid with his own soul. He ran a hand over his face wearily. I thought time would erase it, that getting married, having kids, working, all of it would bury what I felt. But the more I pretended, the more the emptiness grew. And when you grew up and I saw that same sparkle in your eyes, I panicked. Not for you, for me. This confession became a mirror, because, without realizing it, I too spent years afraid of being who I was, afraid of repeating his fate. And now I saw that the cycle only ended if someone had the courage to break it. "So you want to know what I regret most?" he asked. "Not telling the truth sooner, because secrecy doesn't protect. It destroys slowly. I took a deep breath. Then tell me everything, Dad. Now. He looked at me with teary eyes. It's not just about me, son. It's about our whole family. Roberto wasn't the only secret. There were others. And one of them involves you. That sentence lingered in the air. What do you mean, it involves me? He stood, walked to the bookshelf, took out an old wooden box and placed it on the table. Inside were letters, photos, and old documents. There are things in here that change what you think you know about us. My heart was pounding. It was like the ground had fallen away. He looked me in the eye and said, "Before you were born, your mother knew everything, and she made a deal with me, a deal that came at a price neither she nor I could pay." That was the point of no return, the moment when the past merged with the present, and the truth began to emerge from beneath the ruins. If you've made it this far, write the word secret in the comments. Because sometimes what destroys a family isn't the mistake itself. It's the silence that follows, and what follows will show you that every story has a side no one has the courage to tell. I stared at the box like someone staring at a bomb about to explode. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't just curiosity. It was fear of what might come out. My father, still red-eyed, pushed the ashtray away from the table and said, "Everything you need to understand is inside, but if you open it, there's no going back." He spoke with a strange calm, the calm of someone who has already lost everything they had to lose. The lid creaked as I lifted it. Inside, the things seemed too small for the weight they carried: yellowed letters, black and white photographs, and an envelope with an old, half-torn stamp, my mother's name handwritten on it. I picked up the first letter. The paper smelled of something kept hidden, of something that had been waiting too long to be discovered. The first lines were short but direct. "If you're reading this, it's because time has taken its toll on us, and because what we hid now needs to be said." I looked at my father, confused. He simply said, "Read it." And I did. The letter was from my mother, and as the words spilled out, I realized she knew everything about Roberto, their story, and something even worse. She, too, had experienced a forbidden love. "I didn't judge you," the letter said, "because I, too, loved outside the rules. The same secret you carry is what trapped me." My heart raced. It was like the ground was falling away beneath my feet. "She?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "She had someone, too, before you were born." Images began to form in my head. My mother, young, beautiful, with that serene gaze that always seemed to hide something. "Who was he?" I asked. My father took a deep breath. "It wasn't him. It was her." For a second, the air left the room. His voice was firm but sad. "Your mother had an affair with a woman, a distant cousin who lived with us for a while, and when I found out, instead of understanding, I used it against her." This hit me hard. I'd grown up thinking my mother was the epitome of morality, of righteousness, the woman who held the house and the family name together. And now, suddenly, she was someone else, someone who lived in fear, who loved in secret, and who also carried the same shame heaped upon me. "She never told me that," I murmured. "Because I wouldn't let her," my father said. "I threatened her. I told her if she did, I'd take you away from her, and she stayed. She stayed and kept quiet." The silence that followed seemed heavier than air. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, pity. It was as if my entire life had been built on a lie that, ironically, was meant to protect the truth. "Do you understand now why she looked at you that way?" he asked. "She saw in you the freedom she never had." I leaned back in my chair and stared into space, and suddenly everything began to make sense. Her fights with him, the nights she'd sit alone on the porch, her eyes far away. The times she'd tell me, "Never apologize for who you are." I'd thought it was just comfort. Now I saw it was a confession. I picked up one of the photos inside the box. It was my mother, young, laughing, next to a woman I'd never seen before. Their hands touched discreetly, but their gazes said it all. I felt a shiver. "Is that her?" I asked. "Yes," my father replied. "Her name was Helena." "And what happened to her?" I asked. She left, he said. Her mother asked her to. She said she couldn't stand living in fear anymore, and I let her. There was pain, but also regret in his tone. She left, and your mother fell ill. Her body remained, but the rest of her slowly died. I saw her fade away, and I knew it was my fault, but it was too late. I closed the box slowly, as if each object inside were a heart about to break. "And why tell me all this now?" I asked. He looked at me with a sad calm. "Because the shame they placed on you didn't start with you. It started with us, and if someone doesn't break this cycle, it will continue." Those words stuck in my throat, because for the first time I realized that shame was a legacy, passed down from generation to generation, disguised as morality, disguised as care, and that the only way to end it was to speak out, even if it hurt. But there was something in his expression, something that still didn't make sense. He seemed to hide everything else. His gaze was averted, his breathing was shallow, and his hands were shaking. "What else is in this box?" I asked. He hesitated. "There's a letter for you." I picked up the envelope and saw it was sealed. The paper was yellowed, the seal was old. On the back, handwriting I recognized immediately. It was my mother's. "When did she write this?" I asked. "The night before she died." My heart raced. I carefully opened the envelope. The first few lines took my breath away. "My son, if you ever read this, it will be because your father had courage, and I hope you do too." I continued reading, feeling her words pierce my chest like arrows. "You were never a disgrace, never. What you carry is what would free us if we had the courage. So don't hide it. Don't repeat what we did. Live in a way that our silence isn't in vain." The tears came without asking permission. I heard them in those words, the sweet, firm voice full of pain and love at the same time. My father watched me silently, without touching, without interfering. When I finished reading, I asked, "What now?" He replied, "Now you decide what to do with the truth." That sentence stuck in my mind like a challenge, because in a way their story was now mine. And if I did nothing, the weight of shame would fall back on me, and on anyone who came after. I stood there, the letter in my hands, feeling my heart race. It was as if I were about to open a door that had been right in front of me the whole time, but I'd never had the courage to walk through. At that moment, I knew what came next would change everything, for me, for him, and for the entire family. If you're listening to this part of the story and felt the weight of truth, comment below with the word courage, because what comes next is the turning point, the moment when shame changes hands and the truth finally finds light. That night changed everything. After reading the letters, nothing seemed the same. I looked in the mirror and saw a different man, not the failure, the wrong, the disgrace of the family, but someone who, for the first time, saw his own story without the filter of guilt. Still, something inside me ached, as if the letters had opened an old wound, and I didn't know whether to heal it or understand its depth. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what my father had hidden for so long, and why he had made me carry guilt that wasn't mine. The next morning I returned to the old house. The air smelled musty and reminiscent. I entered the office he called his sanctuary, where he kept his books and papers. Everything was still there. The golden pen, the typewriter, the lamp he always left on at night. That's when I found a locked drawer, the same one he'd never let me open as a child. Now I had the key. Inside was a dark wooden box wrapped in an old scarf. I opened it carefully. Inside were old photos, some faded, others torn in half. In one, my father, very young, with another man. His arm draped over my father's shoulder, the two of them smiling in a way I'd never seen before. A light, free smile. On the back of the photo, a date, 1974, and a handwritten phrase, "Our summer." My heart raced. I didn't need anything else to understand. That was the secret. My father lived what I lived, the same silence, the same shame, the same fear. But he didn't have the courage to face it. He chose to hide, get married, have children, build a proper life. And in the end, he took out on me everything he didn't have the courage to be. Suddenly, everything made sense. The hard looks, the cutting remarks, the humiliations. He saw me and saw himself in me, and hated what he saw. It was the reflection of what he tried to erase, and I, without knowing it, inherited his guilt. As I held the photo, I heard a noise behind me. It was the gate. A car pulled up. I looked out the window. It was my uncle, his brother, a man who had always avoided contact with me. He entered without knocking, as if he still thought he owned the house. "I thought you wouldn't come back here," he said. His voice held something between anger and fear. I replied calmly, "I came to get what's mine." He laughed, but not really. "What's yours? The rotten memories your father left behind?" The provocation was clear, but I didn't fall for it. I showed him the photo. He paled. "You shouldn't have thought that," I asked. "Why? Because it shows who he really was?" His silence answered all of itself. He sat down in the armchair, tired. "You think you understand, but you don't understand anything. Back then, that was forbidden. A man could lose everything. And he almost did." I leaned closer. "He lost it in another way. He lost himself." The uncle took a deep breath and said, "I tried to warn him. I told him to stop, to choose the right path. But he was stubborn. He said he loved that man and would never hide it." He paused, looking at the ground. "Until the day they caught them both." The sentence fell like a stone. "How did they get caught?" I asked. He hesitated. "At the barracks. They were reported. The family intervened, hushed it all up. Your grandfather did what he thought was right. He sent the other man away from town, and he made your father swear never to speak of the matter again, and he swore. But that oath killed him inside." For a few seconds, no one said anything. All I could think about was the weight of it all. Decades of silence, fear, appearances, a whole life built on a lie, and I was living proof that the lie continued, because he'd raised me to be his opposite, to hide what he was. "Do you understand now?" the uncle said. "That's why he treated you that way. Because every time he looked at you, he remembered everything he lost." I remained silent. It was hard to feel anger or pity. It was all mixed together. Anger that he'd made me carry a cross that wasn't mine. Pity that he'd never had the chance to be who he truly was. Uncle stood up. "Burn those photos. Leave the past where it is." I looked at him and replied, "No, the past won't burn me anymore." He stared at me, speechless. I knew that in that moment, he understood that the cycle was breaking. I grabbed the photos, the letters, the box. I left without looking back. In the car, I rested my head on the steering wheel. I cried, but it wasn't the cry of pain. It was the cry of someone who understands that forbidden love is unto sin. It's just love that fear kept from blossoming. But one question still haunted me. Who was the man in the photo? The face seemed vaguely familiar, as if time had erased the details but left the shadow. I needed to find out who he was. Something inside me told me his name still lived hidden somewhere, and it was this search that would keep me going. That night I opened my computer and started searching. I found a name repeated in one of the letters, Enrique. I typed that name into the search engine, along with the city and year. And there it was, an old news item from a digitized newspaper. Man disappears after scandal at the barracks. The date matched. The city was the same. And the last line read, "Sources say the missing man was frequently seen with one of the officers involved in the case." My father was the officer. Henry was the missing man. And suddenly, everything changed. Because that very night, a message appeared in my inbox coming from an unknown address. It simply said, "Not everything has been buried." My heart raced. I knew what this meant. Someone, somewhere, still knew the full story. And now, after all these years, someone was ready to tell it. If you're listening to me this far, write a word in the comments, secret. Because the next part of this story will show what happens when the truth starts to come out from under the earth, and what love does when it resurfaces after being hidden for so long. I walked to the address on the old letter with the folded paper in my pocket. It was a small corner bar with a faded sign and the smell of old wood. The chairs creaked. The jukebox had dim lights. It was drizzling. I walked in slowly as if treading on a memory. The bartender looked at me and pointed to the back, without asking anything. There he was, a white-bearded man, a worn, dark suit, large hands, and a simple ring. He stared at me for a few seconds, as if recognizing an old face in another. "You're Jonas's son," he said. My throat went dry. I nodded. He offered me the chair. I sat. The sound of rain hitting the marquee seemed to mark time. "Your father loved me in silence," he said bluntly. "And I loved him back when a man couldn't say anything." His name was Vicente. His voice was deep, firm, but with the slight tremor of someone who's carried a burden for decades. He placed a black and white photo on the table, my father as a young man, smiling, his shirt open at the chest. Beside him, Vicente himself, a cigarette between his fingers. Leaning against each other, their hands almost touching each other's shoulders. The image held warmth, even without color. "I thought he was going to run away with me," Vicente said. "We had a plan. A simple house on the coast, a room with a large window, the bed against the wall, light sheets, 2 pillows. He talked about it like someone praying. And when night fell, we forgot the world. It was sweat, it was kisses, it was the hunger of someone who has been imprisoned for a long time. It wasn't a silly romance, it was life." His words were simple, direct, and they hit my chest like someone pushing a heavy door. I saw my father from a different perspective, a whole man. Not the family myth, not the example, the man. "And why did it end?" I asked. Vicente took a deep breath. "Your grandfather found out. He pressured me. He promised to destroy his work, his reputation, your mother. He weakened, so did I. We separated in a cheap room. It was 4 walls, a yellow lamp, and the desire not to let go. But we did. He got married. I left." The silence in the bar grew. I looked at the photo. I thought of Sunday lunches, my father's hard voice, the cold way he looked at me when I, still young, showed signs of who I was. And I understood something sharp. The man who hurt me was hurt too. "He left you something," Vicente said, pulling an old key from his pocket. "Room 12 of the boarding house on the back street. It still exists. It's empty, but he has his things there. Too much stuff grows moldy in the chest." I took the key. The metal was cold. Vicente touched my hand. It was a short, respectful touch, of a man who knows the weight of what he passes on. "If you go, go at night. No one bothers you." I paid for his whiskey. He didn't want me to pay. I insisted. He squeezed my hand tightly. "Your father was a good man. He only learned about life late in life. You still have time." I left the bar with the key locked in my hand. The street smelled of rain and gasoline. The boarding house was 2 blocks away. Low sign, heavy curtains, empty reception. I climbed the narrow staircase. Each step creaked as if counting years. The door to room 12 had faded paint. I inserted the key. It turned right away. The room opened like a trunk. An iron bed, a lamp, an old radio, a shirt folded on the back of a chair, a manila envelope in a half-open drawer, and in the air, that mixture of cheap soap and old cologne that seems to stick in the memory. I turned on the lamp. The room bore the marks of those who had passed through and wanted to stay. On the table, a notebook with black covers. I opened it slowly. There were short notes, dates, 2 or 3 words per page. Sunday, seaside, laughter. Monday, fear, door. Thursday, full body. Further on, a full page. Today I thought about running away. V and I, 3 changes of clothes, counted money, more courage than I have. But I came home. My mother, my father, work, the name. The name weighs heavily. He understood. I saw the world fit in his hand and slip through his fingers. I kissed his forehead. I said, "One day." Lying hurts. I closed my eyes. I could see the scene. 2 strong, grown men holding each other together to keep from collapsing. Inside the envelope was a folded note. "If my son ever gets here, I want him to know. I made a mistake, and I made a mistake with him too. I was tough so he would be strong. I was cold to protect him from what I experienced. But cold doesn't protect, it freezes. If I could go back, I would hug him and say, 'Have the courage I didn't have.'" I felt the ground slip away for a second. I sat on the edge of the bed. The cold iron on my back woke me. I ran my hand over the wood of the table as if in thanks. And at the same time, I felt anger. Anger at the lie as a rule. Anger at the men don't cry. Anger at the family shame. I stood there for a few minutes. The radio hissed. I turned the knob. An old song filled the room, slow, a crooner's voice. I closed the door from the inside. I took off my shoes. I lay on my back. I looked at the ceiling. It had a stain of water infiltration, like a map. And for a moment I cried, not loudly. I cried like an older man cries, inwardly, to the rhythm of clenched teeth, my chest burning. I thought of Vicente, of my father, of myself. I thought of what this room had held, tired bodies, pent-up laughter, desire. And a simple image came to me. 2 men lying down, one arm over the other, unafraid to open the window. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from my cousin Marcelo, the same one who called me disgraceful last Christmas. "Nonna's not feeling well. Family reunion tomorrow night. No drama," he wrote. I took a deep breath. I knew that meant audience, and audience means stage, and stage can become a courtroom. But this time, I had a voice. I had a key, I had a photo, I had a note, I had a story. I left the room late. I closed the door slowly. I handed the key to the front desk. The young man barely looked up. "Everything okay?" I replied. Finally. I walked to the car. The city had stopped raining. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel. I left the engine off. The silence was thick, pleasant. I understood then that their secret wasn't mine. I wasn't the safe. I was the door opening. The next day I spent the morning rummaging through boxes at home. I found a photo of a young nonna with a scarf in her hair, laughing with a friend I'd never met. On the back, written in pen, R and I, summer of '58. R, the same R, my mother once referred to as a friend, who disappeared when Nonna met my grandfather. In the same box, a postcard from an old hotel, postmarked from another city. Who had sent it? "Open the window, Nonina," with a small heart. I gathered everything in a folder. This story wasn't just my father's. It was a lineage of silences. Me, the easy target. They, the window guards. I opened it. He came in without asking. He looked everything up and down. "So this is it. This is what your father was hiding." I didn't answer. He walked to the table, saw the open envelope, and gave a crooked half smile. "I warned you. Your grandfather and I warned you. This destroys a man." I said softly. "It doesn't. It just hides." He measured me with anger and fear. "You don't understand the real world." He stepped closer. "Your father was a name, a position, a respect." I touched the photo in the envelope. "And he was also a body and a heart." He looked away, touched. Then he took another deep breath. "If you carry this out, everyone will get it. It will be mine." It came out more like a confession than a threat. "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because I was there." The room grew small. "Where?" I asked. "At the barracks, on the day of the complaint. I was the one who signed the paper. I was the one who called your grandfather. I was the one who sent the boy away." He spoke quickly, as if pulling out a thorn. "I did it for the good of the family." I replied, "I did it out of fear." He gripped the back of the chair. "I was 22. You don't know what it was like to live in those times," I breathed. "I know, I live in its echoes." He narrowed his eyes wearily. "Do you want to destroy me?" I shook my head. "No. I want to stop the cycle." He sat. He was silent. The wind ripped at the curtain. The lamp hissed. For a moment, I only heard his breathing. "If you open your mouth," he began. I cut him off, and I already have. He gave a humorless half laugh. "Of course I do." And then he said something I hadn't expected. "He loved you." I froze. "Who?" "Your father. He talked about you to me. He said you had the same glow he once had, and that it scared him." I swallowed hard. He continued. "He asked me once to take care of you, if he couldn't handle it." I let the sentence fall between us. "And you did?" He slowly raised his eyes. "In the wrong way." We both fell silent. There was no music. There was no one in the hallway. I could hear the bar on the corner from afar. I stopped fighting inside. I felt sorry for my uncle, and angry too. Both things fit in the same chest. He stood up. "I'm leaving. Think about what you're going to do." When he put his hand on the doorknob, I said, "I won't hide it, but I'll do it right." He didn't turn around. He just shook his head and left. The hallway swallowed up his footsteps. I sat down and returned to the summer '74 envelope. A small folded piece of paper fell out of the pages. It was an old faded receipt. Pension Mar Azul, room 12, guest 2. 2 signatures, my father and Vicente, date January 12th. On the back of the receipt, an old 4-digit phone number and a short name, Rita. I thought of Nonna and the Open the Window Grandma postcard. Maybe it was another Rita. Maybe it was the same one. Stories intersected. Lines met. I took a photo of the receipt. Put it in my pocket. I closed the drawer. I turned off the light. I locked the room. 2 blocks later, I walked into the bar. Vicente was at the same table. He saw me and lifted his chin. I sat down. I placed the receipt on the table. Open. He touched it with his fingertip. "I kept one just like it for years," he said. "I threw it away one Christmas that hurt. I wanted to say, 'I'm sorry,' but I didn't." He took a breath and handed me a small metal box. "The old owner of the boarding house gave me this when he found out your father had passed away. I didn't have the courage to open it. You can open it." The box had a scratch on the top, like a crooked smile. I opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring with scratches. Inside, engraved J+V. I closed my eyes. I felt the weight of the metal. It was tiny and enormous. Vicente touched my hand across the table. It was a firm, secure touch, from man to man, shameless. He took a sip of water. "There's going to be a family reunion, isn't there?" I smirked. "Yes, tonight was the warm-up." He nodded. "Then give the ring to whoever needs to see it." "To whom?" "To you first, then to your nonna. Sometimes old people just need proof to breathe easy." I tucked the box into my inside jacket pocket. I stood up. He sat calmly. "If you want to come back tomorrow, I'll open more memories." I smiled lightly. "I'll be back." On the way home, the city seemed less crowded. I stopped the car at a traffic light and looked in the rearview mirror. My face was the same, but something behind my eyes had changed. It wasn't triumph, it was clarity. I got home, washed my face, sat at the table, and grabbed a clean notebook. I wrote things down in short sentences so I wouldn't forget. Marcelo threatens but doesn't order. Uncle confesses to the accusation. Envelope 74, J+V ring. Rita? I flicked an arrow next to the word Rita and wrote, "Old phone, bar's landline, the boarding house, ask tomorrow." My phone vibrated. A message from Marcelo. "You crossed the line." I typed slowly. The line was lying. He typed, deleted, and sent an audio message. I didn't open it. Another message followed shortly after. "Tomorrow everyone will be there. If you show up, it's at your own risk." I stared at the screen. Then I typed, "Tomorrow I'll bring the truth. Whoever wants it, stays. Whoever doesn't, leaves." I archived the conversation. I didn't block it, I didn't hide it, I just archived it. The fears we archive lose their teeth. I lay down and closed my eyes. The ring in my inner pocket seemed to pulse against my chest. I pictured my father as a young man, the window open, the warm wind, Vicente chuckling. The two of them pressed together, skin to skin, no grand promises, just presence. There's no silly romance there. There's life, there's a body, there's choice, and there's the price of not choosing. I woke up early. Cold shower, strong coffee. I put on a simple, clean shirt. I grabbed my briefcase, my mother's letter, the photo, the receipt, and the ring box. Before leaving, I looked in the mirror and whispered, "Today no shouting, today with proof." At the gate, my neighbor saw me and asked if everything was okay. I smiled. Now it is. My father stood there, silent, staring into space. I could feel the weight lifting from him. Helena got up, went to the window and opened it. The wind blew in slowly, rustling the curtains. The air smelled of wet earth. "The window is open," she said symbolically. "Now love can breathe." And that was the moment I understood. The shame was never mine. It was theirs. And finally, she was leaving the house. If you've made it this far, comment on the word truth or window. I want to know who understood that love doesn't need permission to exist, and that sometimes opening a window is the same as starting a new life. But this story isn't over yet, because that night, just when I thought everything was resolved, the phone rang. The number was unknown. The voice on the other end, low, said simply, "There's something you still don't know. The name of the man in the portrait wasn't Vicente." The phone was still vibrating in my hand when the voice on the other end repeated slowly, "The name of the man in the portrait wasn't Vicente." The sound seemed to come from a dream. For a moment I thought it was a prank, or some cruel prank played by someone who'd heard the story. "Who's this?" I asked. The answer came cold, calculated. "Someone who also lived in hiding, and who needs to show you something before it's too late." The line dropped. I stood still, my heart racing. The sound of the wind blowing past the window seemed like a warning. I looked back at the portrait. That shadow in the corner, that crooked smile. The more I looked, the less certain I became. Vicente seemed sincere, but what if he wasn't who he said he was? I picked up the phone again, looked at the number, and saw it was a public phone, an old payphone, the kind almost no one uses anymore. The address? It was on the same street as the old factory where my father worked, the same place where it all began. I didn't think twice. I grabbed my coat and keys and left. The city was asleep, the streetlights stretched across the wet ground. When I arrived, the factory gate was ajar. I entered slowly. The sound of creaking iron echoed, mixed with the smell of oil and dust. Inside, only one light was on at the back of the warehouse. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in time with my steps. A man sat in a chair, his back to me. Grey hair, an open shirt, the same simple ring I'd seen in the photo. But now his face was different. When he turned, I recognized him immediately. It was Vicente's brother. "My name is Arthur," he said. "And before he died, my brother asked me to keep something. He said that if Jonas's son ever came looking for him, I should give it to him." He pulled a small envelope from his pocket, folded carefully, as if it held fire inside. "What's in there?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Letters, and a photo. The last one." I opened it slowly. The handwriting was my father's. "Arthur, if he shows up, tell him it wasn't his fault. Tell him that night I chose to stay too. That love didn't kill anyone. Fear killed everything." Inside the envelope, the photo showed the two of them together, lying on a simple bed, tired smiles, hands clasped. On the back, the date. June 12th, 1985. It was the same day Vicente had mentioned as their farewell. "He died that night," Arthur continued, "but it wasn't from a heart attack like they said. He poisoned himself. He had left a letter for his father, asking for forgiveness for not being able to bear living in hiding any longer." This revelation hit me like a blow. "My father knew?" I asked. Arthur nodded. "He knew, and he never forgave himself." I felt the ground shake. It was as if all the stories I'd heard took on new meaning. The man who called me a disgrace carried within him a pain that never healed. "But there's one more thing," Arthur said, opening an old leather briefcase. Inside was a black and white photo of a group of workers, and among them the same face I'd seen in photos of my young mother. "Helena, your mother and my brother knew each other," Arthur said. "They worked together for a while, and she was the one who tried to save them both. She knew everything." His words left me dizzy. "You mean Helena knew about my father and Vicente?" "She knew, and she helped cover it up. She loved your father too, but in a different way. She loved the man, not the silence. She was the one who took the body to the hospital, who filed the false report. Your father broke down after that, and she disappeared for a while." Silence fell between us. Outside, the rain began to fall again. I looked at the envelope in my hands and felt the weight of all those hidden decades. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. Arthur responded with a weary look. Because shame is a chain, and you're the first in your family with the courage to break it. He stood up, put on his hat, and said, There's one last thing you need to see. In room 12, where you found the letters, there's a false drawer just below the desk. What's in there will change everything you think about your father. I left the factory with my heart racing. The rain was getting heavier, and each step felt heavier. When I reached the boarding house, the hallway was dark. I climbed the stairs with shaking hands. Room 12 felt the same, a musty smell, a thick silence, the radio still on the table. I knelt and knocked on the wood of the drawer until I heard a hollow sound. There it was. I pulled slowly. Inside, a blue-covered notebook. On the first page, his handwriting. If I could go back... I turned the pages and found words that didn't seem written by a bitter man, but by someone alive, in love, confused. His body was home, his kiss refuge. But fear has strong hands and pulled me back into the darkness. On another page, Helena found me. She said the pain of hiding love is greater than the pain of losing it. Maybe she's right. But I was born in a time when the wrong love cost one's name. The sentences cut through me. It was as if I were hearing his voice for the first time, unfiltered, unhardened, unprincipled, and then, on the last page, a single line. If he ever reads this, tell him not to repeat it. Tell him to love like no one is watching. I closed the notebook slowly. The room seemed to breathe with me. The radio crackled again, and an old song began to play, soft and melancholic. I stood there for minutes trying to make sense of it all. My father loved a man, my mother loved a woman, and they both hid what they were to sustain a lie called the perfect family. And I, who grew up being called a disgrace, was the only one who could bring closure to this story. That night, I left the guest house without looking back. The rain stopped and the sky cleared a little. In the reflection of the puddle, I saw my face, tired but clean. For the first time, I saw myself whole, without shame, without guilt, without disguise. When I got home, I sat in front of the mirror and began to write. I needed to record everything, so that this time the story wouldn't be told by someone who's afraid, but by someone who's lived it. And as I wrote, I understood what I truly inherited from my father. Not fear, but the desire to love without asking permission. If you've made it this far, comment freedom or true love. Because sometimes the greatest courage a man can have is to look at his own story and say, I am not the mistake, I am the beginning. But what happened the next day, when an unmarked letter arrived on my doorstep with just one handwritten sentence, his son is still alive, was what changed everything. The letter lay there on the table with no sender, just a handwritten sentence, his son is still alive. I read and reread those words dozens of times, as if the paper could change its meaning with each reading. My heart beat fast, my hands sweating. His son? Who was that sentence referring to? My father? The man he loved? Or someone I never imagined existed? I spent the night awake. Every old memory came back like a poorly edited fragment of a movie. My father leaving home late, his low voice on the phone, the long trips no one could explain. Suddenly, everything that had once seemed routine began to feel like a clue. What if he'd left more than letters and regrets? The next day I returned to the guest house. Room 12 was empty, but the receptionist, a tired-looking woman, seemed to be expecting me. You're Jonas's son, aren't you? She asked. I nodded. She looked around and said, Then you need to see something. She took out a set of old keys and led me down to the basement. The smell of mold and old wood reminded me of my childhood, the same smell as my father's office. She turned on a dim lamp and pointed to a metal box. Your father left this with me many years ago. He said, if his son ever came looking for answers, I should give it to him. The lock was rusty. With effort, I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, photos, and a red folder. The first thing I saw was a birth certificate. Mother's name, Helena. Father's name, Jonas. Child's name, Gabriel. Date, 1986. My body froze. Gabriel. A name I'd never heard within the family. Did he have another child? I asked, my voice almost broken. The woman simply said, There was a girl who came here with a baby, always very discreet. She said she was a friend of Vicente's. Then she disappeared. I took the document in my hands. The letters trembled. Gabriel would be my brother, my father's son with Helena, the son he had hid. It was as if time had suddenly bent and turned backward. Each secret revealed made way for another, deeper, more dangerous. I ran home with the paper in my hands. I spread everything out on the table, the letters, the photos, the notes, my father, my mother, Vicente, Helena, and now Gabriel. How many lives had my father's silence touched? How many people had he hurt, trying to hide what he was? And most importantly, where was this son? I opened my computer and started searching. I used his full name, date of birth, and city. I found a blood donation record for a certain Gabriel V. de Almeida, his age approximate, the same city where my father worked in the 1980s. My heart raced. I logged onto social media and typed in his name. There he was. A man in his early 30s with a steady gaze, the same as mine when I was young. In his profile picture, a detail that made me hold my breath. He was wearing the same simple ring Vicente wore in his old photos. I wrote a short message. "We need to talk. It's about Jonas." He saw it immediately and replied, "I thought you'd never show up." We arranged to meet at the same bar where I met Vicente. When I arrived, he was already there, and for a moment I swear I thought I was looking at a younger version of my father. The resemblance was uncanny. He held out his hand. "So you're the other son?" I was speechless. "The other one?" I asked. He nodded. "Yes. I grew up hearing that my father had another boy, but that he never wanted anything to do with me." We sat down. The silence between us was thick, almost palpable. "Who told you?" I asked. He looked at his glass and replied, "My mother, before she died. She said her love was forbidden, but that from that love something beautiful was born. Me." He laughed, with a touch of irony. "But beautiful is an understatement when your whole life you've been someone's secret." I told him everything I knew about my father, my mother, Vicente, the letters. He listened silently, his eyes welling up. "So he never looked for you?" I asked. "Only once," he replied. "I was 10. He showed up with a box of toys. He said he was a friend of my mother's. I didn't know who he was. I only realized years later when I saw an old photo. It was him. Jonas. That memory pierced me like a knife. The man who spent his life calling me a disgrace had another son, born of a love he never had the courage to admit, a son he loved in secret. "Do you feel angry with him?" I asked. Gabriel thought for a moment. "I did for a long time, but then I understood that he was a man trapped in a time period too small for the extent of his feelings. He made a mistake. But who hasn't made a mistake trying to protect themselves?" We were silent for a while. The waiter brought 2 coffees, the smell mingling with the distant sound of rain outside. "You know what I think?" Gabriel said. "The family's shame was never you nor me. The shame was theirs, those who feigned purity to hide their fear." I smiled. For the first time, it rang true. "Do you want to meet the rest of the family?" I asked. He looked out the window thoughtfully. "Not yet, but one day maybe, when I feel they deserve to know who I am." We said goodbye with a long, strong hug, like brothers separated by time, but reunited by blood and truth. When I left the bar, the wind was cold, but my body was warm. The city felt different, as if I too had moved. I got home and looked at my mother's last letter still open on the table. Her words echoed again. "Don't repeat what we did. Live in such a way that our silence wasn't in vain." And in that moment, I understood what she meant. I picked up my phone, opened my social media, and began writing a simple, direct, and truthful text. I wrote about my father's love, my mother's silence, and the reunion with my brother. I wrote about what it means to carry shame that isn't yours, and about how the fear of being who we are is more destructive than any mistake. And at the end, I wrote, "This is my family, imperfect, broken, human, and therefore real." I posted, not to expose, but to free. And when I closed the computer, I felt something I'd never felt before, peace. The same peace my mother wished for, the same peace my father sought. The peace of someone who finally doesn't owe anyone an explanation. If you've stuck around this far, it's because this story touched you in some way, and perhaps it reminded you of something you've experienced or someone who also carries the weight of silence. So, before you leave, do this. Leave a like, because it shows YouTube that this kind of story deserves to reach more people. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take advantage of it now. Here each video is a new story. Intense, true, full of emotion and revelations that many people don't have the courage to tell, but that need to be heard. And I want to know, what part of this story struck you the most? Write a word in the comments that sums up what you felt. It could be true, release, or courage. Reading what you write is what makes it all worthwhile, and it's not over yet. The next video is already appearing here on the screen. Click and keep watching, because it's a direct continuation of this story with a twist no one could have imagined. See you there.